All right, well, welcome everybody. I guess let's go ahead and do some introductions. We have some returning members and a new person. So my name's Doug Gooden. I'm the president.
Chris James, visiting. I've had a few friends who have been members of this group. So.
Oh, who?
Julius Chapman,
Ring a
Coast
bell.
Guard.
Okay.
Yeah, active duty.
Okay.
He left a while ago. He had to move, but
I had
family
to
got
stop.
me. The family just got me a big old double refraction. It's like,
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
you're here.
Good.
Good
That's a
deal.
good one. Good family to have.
West Job Secretary.
Your turn. Introduce yourself.
Oh, Richard Wilds,
Yes.
retired.
Yeah, aren't we all? Jan Berger, I've been here, in this group, I'm the longest serving member of LECAL.
Okay.
And I earned all of these that
I'm Vivian Clark and I'm homeschooled.
way.
Keith Barnett, we recently moved to Topeka because we have grandchildren here and trying to retire. Second or third time.
All right.
Jeff Goodman, member.
Parker Leslie, member. Lynn Kress, member.
Russell Valentine.
Okay. Well, we may have a few more people wander in, so as they do, we will make fun of them and wonder why they're late. Can somebody turn off some lights? Or- Can you guys see this okay? Or?
I can deal with that. I do this all the time. For our other meetings.
Shut down a little
Let's
bit.
see if they're.
There we
How's
go.
that?
Look at
Okay,
that.
now that we're astronomers, we can handle this.
Yeah.
See the stars.
That's right.
And a
I was
Shows what light pollution does.
Yeah, internal light pollution.
I was driving the other night, and it dawned on me that my night vision is not what it once was.
Yeah, funny
You
how
know.
that works, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I'm about ready to.
Cataracts.
Tomorrow I will be 65. So that's
Oh, you're still a kid.
yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, you got a ways to go yet.
I'm starting to, the cataracts are starting to form.
Oh, yeah.
Well, anyway, welcome everybody to the monthly meeting. As ever, let's have we have a few announcements, club news, stuff of that nature. These are the upcoming events and meetings. Obviously, you know about this meeting because you're here. I guess March is going to be. This will be our first public night in a
Yes,
while,
this
right?
year.
So March 22nd, which I think might also be the equinox. So we'll kill two birds with one stone. We can. Oh, you got to be impressed by the equinox.
Oh, well.
You can't see it, but it's there.
Oh, it's such a cool, I had a graduate student who years ago who, one of the things I is involved in a lot of the calculations I do for the work I do is calculating what's called the solar zenith angle, right? It's the angle between where the sun is and directly overhead. And he was consistently would write solar zenith angel. And so it became almost a thing in my lab. We had the solar zenith angel display that another student had created of this angel holding and on the days of the equinox, the angel held a balance that was balanced. And then on the days of the solstices, it was tilted one way and tilted the other. This is what happens when you have smart people who don't have enough to do or something like that. So, anyway, so that's the 22nd. Next general meeting is March.
Will that be at Farpoint?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, that will be at Farpoint. And of course, that's always weather permitting. And as always, we need volunteers to help out with that, even if you can't or feel like you don't want to run a scope or go out and give a talk about something. Having volunteers out there, I'm not so great at any of that stuff myself, so having some volunteers out there to just kind of direct traffic and watch over people and that sort of thing is always a great help to us. So if you'd like to volunteer, if you want to just come out and enjoy the show, that's certainly welcome as well. Next general meeting will be March 27th and so on. As ever, I'm always looking for ideas for meeting topics and even more noteworthy or even more valuable volunteers. to take over for a meeting. So if you would like to do that, I would be quite pleased to yield the floor for, you know, however long you want it. So anyway, let's see, a few other things that have come up. There was this might have gone just to the board, or it might have gone to the general group, I'm not sure, but one of the members, and his name is Michael, who I'm not sure I know, has a telescope that Michael Baldessaro, anybody know him? I'm not sure I've met him. Anyway, he has a pretty high quality Celestron, I guess 9¼ inch telescope that he is basically offering to a good home. His preference would be that it would go to a relatively young person. We have I think Ratra, who's a faculty member at K-State, has mentioned that there's a student there, presumably one of their physics graduate students, who is maybe of interest, so she's probably, I think, kind of thrown her a name in the hat. But I guess my feeling is that I told Michael I would announce that at the meeting, and then maybe, you know, he can make the decision. I don't know how he wants to do that, but I mean, he sent me a picture. It was a pretty nice looking scope. So if you know of a potential person who might be interested, you might want to shoot me or Michael or both of us an email.
Are there any high school astronomy clubs that might be interested?
I don't know, actually. That's a really good question. I will, I don't know. Do you know, Jan, if there's
I
any?
don't know of any anymore.
It's a pretty big scope to, whoever would go to, I think, would have to be kind of making a commitment to it, because, you know, it's a pretty big,
What type of scope is it? I didn't.
it's a Celestron.
That's the
You
brand
said
name.
it's a
right?
nine-
I don't know what the make is. It's
I mean-
9.25 inch.
I mean, you
so-
know, is it a Schmidt Cass? Is it?
Oh, yeah, it's an SET, but
Yeah.
it's a 9 and.
All azimuth mount.
Yes, yes. It's, it's on an alt-azimuth fork.
Okay.
So, and I think it's got all the go-to stuff and all that. I mean, it looks pretty spiffy, to be honest
So
with
it
you.
says barely 11.
Yeah. Barely, yeah. Yeah, it would take a commitment of, you know, upper body strength to haul that thing around. But. So anyway, that is also an announcement.
Big Mamma Jam. 40 years ago, I had one.
Anybody
That I
have
considered portable.
Any announcements, things they want to throw out there?
From the sitting in my sunroom.
I do have a general question. So obviously you have your public astronomy nights. How frequently are people out at Fall Point for members and other events?
Well, that's a good question. We have tried to have member-only nights, and honestly, we haven't had a lot of interest. So I think that they technically still exist. We just haven't scheduled one. I know. Of course, we've also kind of coming out of the time of year when nobody wants to go out in the cold. So I don't know. Do we want to kind of revive interest in what we've talked about is having sort of maybe themed member nights, so people might, you know, somebody might want to have a theme like how to use a scope or something like that. But again, my understanding is, and unfortunately I'm not a good example in this because they happen a lot of times when I can't be there, so I've not been a good example in that. That said, I certainly would not, if there's a groundswell of interest to start, you know, trying to revive members' nights, I would not speak against it.
Well, just like a church function, you know, if you feed them, sometimes they'll come.
Maybe that's the way to go. I would certainly, any members that are interested in just getting out to Park Point, I would just say come out to the public night
And, yeah, come out to the public night and we can kind of talk about it and see, you know, what your interests are and, you know, if you want to come out, you know, basically do your own thing, or if you'd like somebody there to help you when you're just getting started, or you're having trouble with the telescope or whatever, you let us know, and then we can try to, you know, take care of that particular need, requirement, et cetera.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing we have to watch out for is, not so much now as in the fall, but if the school has some kind of a big event, because then they'll have every light, you know, in the county on. So that's always one of the things we have to kind of watch out for.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can just, send an email out to well, check out the moon phase too, but we used to do things like, we'd have one open house or especially a month where we'd say, okay, this is moon night, and we'd have it, close to first quarter, and people could come out and see the moon, and that's always was a real popular thing, because it just ain't the same as when you're looking at a picture.
Sure.
And,
And usually on public nights, there's multiple telescopes set up, and
right.
occasionally some kind of discussion of what's in the sky that night and what it is they'll actually be seeing. So it has a little bit of there's a little structure to it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other announcements, questions, anything? No? Well, I thought I would share a little bit of the survey results. For those who have responded to the survey, thank you. If you haven't and you would like to, it's still available as far as I know. I've set it up on this thing called Survey Monkey, which for the free version I think times out after a while. So if you are going to respond, I would say you probably want to do it. But again, a little context here for some of you maybe that were not here last month. The idea has been floated to move the Tombaugh from Farpoint to a site actually on the Cress family land south of Council Grove, and operate it essentially as a remote station. And is the door locked?
Oh, well, it's yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Region.
Oh. So this is an idea that's been kind of floated. So what we talked about last meeting was essentially presenting that idea, and what we thought was that we should get a sense of what the membership's opinion on this was, collective opinion. So we circulated a survey which only had one question on it, which is how do you feel about this? And the results of the survey I can show you. We got, I believe, 16 responses, but only 15 people checked one of the, either yay or nay. So it came out at 12 yays or whatever you want to call it, 12 support relocating, 13 or 3 would prefer that it remain in its current location. I wish I could show you some of the comments, because they are actually probably a little bit more useful than just this 12 and 3. But I can't get SurveyMonkey to come up on this computer for some reason. So, but I can kind of summarize, I think, particularly what some of the concerns were. A lot of them were like, yeah, it's a great idea, and that's nice, but not all that helpful. What the concerns were, I think, fell into a couple of categories. The most obvious one was it's going to cost a hell of a lot of money, and it would. Estimated costs have, the numbers that have been thrown around have been, in some cases, north of 50,000. So in some cases, well north of 50,000. So this would not be cheap by any means to do. Some of the other concerns were, I thought, maybe a result of us, meaning me, perhaps not have communicated clearly to people who may not have been here what the actual proposal is. Because this is not a proposal to close the current Farpoint or to even to downgrade it necessarily. It's strictly a proposal to move the Tombaugh to a remote site where it would be operated remotely. So there were a couple people who expressed some concerns of, like, it's so far from Topeka, can't we find a closer place? But in fact, if we ran it the way we have discussed, there would be no public access to it. It would not be open to the public, and it would really only be occupied at times when maybe maintenance or something like that was being done. Otherwise, it would be operated strictly as a remote facility. So while there certainly would be, a need to access it, it would not be it would not be a replacement for Farpoint. So I kind of tried to, I sent out an email today where I tried to kind of emphasize that point. All right, this would be operated remotely. It would still be a club asset. Anyone who is a club member that goes through the necessary training to use it would be eligible to use it, but it would not be, wouldn't be like, and I would see Farpoint still being the public facing, whatever term you want to use. That would be where public nights would be done and club activities would mostly be done. And Gary Hugg, who's not here tonight, most of you know, has actually indicated that he might want to donate his 22-inch telescope, and it would go into where the, essentially would go where the tombola is now. So there would be some, pretty significant aperture out there that could be used for things like public observation nights, or maybe even a little bit of other types of stuff. So anyway, based on this, what I think the next move would be, and again, I hate to invoke the C word, but the next move, I think, would be to appoint a committee to begin the process of looking into how to do this, right? How to raise the money, how much it's going to cost, is this really possible? I don't see that as committing to the process, right? That does not mean we're going to do this, because it's going to be very contingent on raising funding for it. One of the comments I got back was, well, with all the changes in federal funding, who's going to fund? We would have had like a ghost of a chance of getting any federal money to do this anyway. This is just not what research funding goes for, all right? And believe me, I'm looking at a loss of about $10 million of research funding that is now on the chopping block, which is making my life a little more stressful than I would like it to be. But anyway, or I shouldn't say me, the university is looking at this, which is making our life pretty stressful. But anyway, so we would probably be looking at trying to raise funding more from private sources. I've actually already reached out to a couple of people to see if they might be willing to serve on the committee. I might reach out to a couple more. I want to try to get a mix of people on there that come from a lot of different backgrounds. If you really feel strongly like you'd like to do it, I'd certainly take volunteers. But I am of the opinion that committees should be kept as lean as possible. Right? It's like an exponential function of committee, an inverse exponential function of committee effectiveness, right? The bigger the number, the smaller the effectiveness, till eventually it, approaches a zero asymptote. So anyway,
A quick suggestion, having nothing to do with but so I listened to the meetings online, at the recorded version, and you're fairly soft-spoken. I can hear you even though I'm going deaf, but I really had a hard time even with the speaker all the way at max.
Okay.
So if you could just be more aggressive, it might help for anybody that's trying to stream it and see it.
Well, part of the problem, my problem is that I spend a lot of my days lecturing, and by the end of the day, I'm really, really tired of talking. So, plus I'm in a room with a microphone, which kind of cheats. But I'll try. I will definitely try to speak up. Thanks for letting me know. Does anybody have anything they would like to say or add on this? Again, I think it's important for us all to kind of understand that this is still just an idea, all right? I won't lie, I'm personally kind of in favor of this, largely because the whole motivating factor is that the sky condition, or at least the light conditions at Farpoint, are pretty steadily degrading. Largely because of things that the schools have done, which it is their sandbox. So if they want to put up lights, I guess that's their we're playing in their sandbox. But
well, just on that note, if you're out there, when we 30 years ago or so when Far Point was built, the Sky Globe from Topeka was much, much, much less.
Yeah,
If you stand, you know, like on the driveway or on the pad, you look toward the shed, that was about as how high as it was then.
Right.
And it's way up there now.
Yeah, about 30 degrees.
yeah. Well, and I think some of that is just a consequence of growth, and some of it's a consequence of intensification, and some of it's just a consequence of the fact that light is different now. You know, the lighting that's being used is more blue, you know, so it, so it kind of affects, it just covers a range of the wavelengths, you know, the range of wavelengths that particularly like a lot of the sensors that we use are really, just because of physics really, are very sensitive to blue light. So, you know, as the light gets bluer, they get saturated faster, or I guess maybe saturated is not the right word, but they become degraded faster. So anyway, so yeah, that's definitely part of it. The local lighting is a part of it. There's people out there that are putting up lights for whatever reason, you know. It's just reached a situation where I think what we estimated, I think you looked into this, Parker, that we've lost like half a magnitude of some, or
More than that.
maybe more than that.
Well, probably closer to 1.5 magnitudes.
Okay, so that's, you know, that's kind of substantially cuts into our ability to see the really faint objects that we've been trying to go after.
So, a couple quick questions, because I've used SurveyMonkey before. How many members are there? How many were solicited for the survey? And did you have the feature, in the free version, it may not be available, did you have the feature to see if they even opened the email?
I did not, no. I don't know if that's, I know that it was limited to 25 in the free version. I sent out the email to the general list, so it should have gone to all the members.
I think we have 30.
Yeah.
Right around 30 members.
But 16 have responded. And I think there's, I think the limit on this is actually 25, so if it goes up to 25, then we may need to start over again or something like that. But yeah, I didn't really feel like I wanted to pay for SurveyMonkey just to get all the bells and whistles, but yeah.
Okay.
Doug, did you have a third concern? I'm making notes here.
Did I?
You said three. Money, and then worry of the comments about closing Far Point. Was there anything else?
I think that was it. No, I can't think of it. Money was one of the obvious ones. I mean, one of the things we've tried to emphasize here is that we want to do this in a way that's not going to come out of member pockets, right? Because number one, I don't think it would be futile to raise dues for something like this, right? If we went from $25 to $30 a year or whatever, the amount of money we would raise would not even, be a drop in the bucket of what it would take to do this. So it makes, in my mind, no sense to raise money that way, because it would, I'm afraid, drive away members or make them less enthusiastic, and it would be of no help. There was actually a really good comment, I thought, by some, and again, these were all anonymous. This whole thing was set up to be anonymous. Concern that just the ongoing operating costs of two places, insurance and things like that, would be something we'd need to take into account. So, whoever ends up on the committee would probably, one of the things the committee would need to do is think about how we support this ongoing, another facility, presumably with insurance associated with it. I'm not sure if the insurance would need to be quite as much, because there wouldn't really be people out there the way there are now. I don't know if that matters or not, but I don't know. Tony, do you know if that enters at all into our insurance?
A little bit. I think with the size of the space that we have, and then not having the public out there will probably help out, which you're gonna have theft, loss, and then storm damage, or insurance stuff that's on.
Yeah, and there's always a chance of that now. And we've had experience with that. We had a break-in a few years ago that cost us a pretty significant amount of money to bounce back from. So yeah, I mean, that's a really valid concern, and I think that's something that any members who are involved in the planning of all this will need to that will need to be part of the thing. So I guess that's really all I had to say about about that. Again, if you really would like to volunteer for the committee, let me know. Otherwise, again, I've kind of talked to a couple people now, and any other comments?
I just think when we look at the fundraise, I think to your point earlier, that we'll look at not only the cost of the actual moving, the physical move, but all the other intangible kinds of things of ongoing costs and insurance and all those other things. So it'll be more than just the cost of the actual physical move.
You know, and construction of the facility would obviously be, you know, non-trivial cost, because there would have to be power and access and a building, and you know, it is not gonna be a dime store operation. All right, other questions or comments on that? So if you do want to respond to the survey, I think it's still out there. I sent out a couple of emails that have the link in it. I can send out another one if people would like that. Anyway, all right.
Great.
So, any other announcements or club business of any kind?
Tell us about the meteor, it's not gonna hit us.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, finally.
Apparently the odds are now down to well below 1, right?
Yeah.
So,
Oh, okay.
well, you know,
Yeah.
it gets people's attention.
Why didn't say that part? They changed their mind.
Yeah,
Things
it went
change
from 3
today.
to like 0.00015, I think.
Yeah. Well, you know, I always cringe a little bit when those things come out, because you know, there's all this, whoa, you know,
Okay.
1 out of 30 chance, and then all of a sudden, oh, wait a minute, no, it's not, you know. But I saw something about, there's a new mission being organized to go to one of the Earth-crossing asteroids to kind of to test it with whether it's mineable. You know, and the thing that always cracks me up about that is they say, oh, you know, there's all this, if we got this, we would have trillions and trillions of dollars worth of metal. I'm like, no, you would make that metal almost worthless, because there'd be so much of it. But, you know, it's like the people that do that are not really, you know, economists. Is this a
This is
question?
Graham.
Oh,
Graham, you wanted to say something.
You know, and construction of the facility would obviously be.
Graham, you can talk.
Yeah, if I could speak a minute here.
yes.
Oh, okay. Hey, you're losing a little anonymity, because I'm going to admit to being the one who raised a lot of concerns about ongoing costs.
Okay.
One of the problems we've faced in the past is we've had to ask for donations to pay for insurance. We're getting a heck of a break from the school on our utility costs. Electricity costs will be a lot higher out there than they are at Farpoint. Solar is not a good option for this observatory, as you can well imagine.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I'd like to sit down and maybe work out some of these ongoing costs, because I think I'm a little concerned that it's going to take a lot in the way of donations or a big increase in membership to support 2 facilities. Granted, you probably won't need water at the new facility. I would think not, which will save quite a bit of money. But you will need some electricity. Need a phone service. You'll need internet service. No, phone service probably not, but internet service definitely. And the costs at Farpoint probably won't drop a dime.
No.
I can't. They won't. It'll be all new costs as far as I see it.
Yeah.
That's all I really felt like adding.
Oh.
Unless somebody has questions.
Well, I mean, I do agree that, and I think as Angel pointed out, one of the things that would have to be a priority for the planning on all this is how do we meet that? You know, we don't want
Right.
to just kind of, you know, trust that everything will be fine, because it may not be.
That's
know?
true. That's true.
So, and I agree with you that I don't think we can do this through internal fundraising, because we just cannot raise that amount of money. This is going to require some significant support from outside.
But that's fine for an ongoing, for a startup cost, but
Yeah.
I don't know how you really do outside funding for ongoing costs. That's going to be difficult.
Well, you know, and one of the things that, you know, your experience here, I think, with you know, setting up the scopes you've set up might be of real value here, because I think you might have a clearer idea what that stuff really would cost.
Yeah, my brother was a huge bank.
Graham Bell was one of the people who started the
Yeah,
Destroy
yeah.
program. Hud Bell, which was just
Yeah,
very,
it is.
very
It isn't cheap. But you're not going to be going into it the way my brother and I did.
Yeah, right,
You know, we're paying $800 a month just to rent a pier.
right. Well, you know, in a way that's kind of, you know, I can see the value of that, especially where you are, because you get really good skies where your site is, but
All the beautiful skies.
I imagine so. That's kind of my dream, but anyway. Well, thank you.
But, well,
Yeah.
yeah, that's and I wouldn't mind serving on the committee if you're interested in me.
I would welcome your input. I'll shoot you an email, and maybe we can kind of work that out.
Okay. I'm a volunteer. I'm not asking desperately to be on by any means, but
All right.
okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Thank
That's
you.
all I had.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
All right. Other comments?
Yeah, the only other thing, not to get too into weeds on it, but just to say that in turn, one thing that we can think about too in terms of long-term costs is some of the money we raise can also be invested, and so we can look in a fund that is a investment fund that then gains interest and yields things in perpetuity.
Right, like
and that's probably better for ongoing costs. So there's lots of ways to structure that so that there's some ongoing to support that kind of stuff.
well, some kind of a legal trust or something might. Would that be kind of a
Do this
set of?
Endowment, yeah, it would be an endowment fund.
Okay. Well, again, these are the kinds of things that I would hope that we could sort of delegate the committee to look into. All right. Other comments? All right.
Tonight's, we're gonna be turning in their t-shirt orders. Anybody would like a t-shirt or a hoodie, taking orders?
I actually have a check. I have a check for you. When I'll,
We'll be turning those in this weekend. We'll be getting those in March.
okay.
Got, order
Yeah.
forms here if anybody is interested.
Okay. I got.
Hasn't gotten them.
Yeah, I'll have a check for you maybe after we're done here. All right. Well, let's talk about astronomy for a while then. After we've talked about other club stuff. I was trying to come up with a good you know, we typically, those of you maybe not been here a while or are new, we typically have two parts to this. There's the kind of focus part. We talked a little bit about something in the sky, constellation or something like that, and then we have a kind of a longer presentation. So I was trying to think of something I hadn't done before, right? You know, because I didn't want to start into reruns, you know, it becomes like Gilligan's Island where it's just on forever. But and it kind of and I was just kind of out walking and looking at the sky, and I thought, oh, the Pleiades are up there, and I thought, why not? So I thought maybe we would, plus, you know, it's a smaller thing, so a little easier to do. I thought we would focus on the Pleiades. Pleiades are, one of the nice things about them is they're exceptionally easy to find. You know, I'm not a super good celestial navigator. I can, you know, find my way around a little bit, but I always thought the Pleiades were a pretty simple one, because basically you just more or less draw a line through Orion, and there it is. So, so that's pretty easy, and also lies almost exactly on the celestial equator, you know, so that kind of makes it a sort of a significant point. It actually is a very significant point in the sky, which we'll talk about here in just a second. But so if you want to find the Pleiades, that's how you do it. It's mostly, I think, a fall and winter. I think it'll kind of be, it's still visible, but it won't be for that much longer, I don't think. So anyway, easy to find. There's a nice picture. I don't know where this is, but this kind of shows relationship of that there. It's actually, if you think about what the Pleiades is, it's sometimes refers to it as a constellation. It's really not. It's an asterism, which is just a kind of group of stars, basically. Sometimes it's called the Mini Dipper or something because it looks a little bit like a tiny little Big Dipper. But anyway, it's actually located in Taurus. It's an open cluster. It's a Messier object, and like all Messier objects, it was originally cataloged in order to be not confused with a comet. So that was the originization of the Messier. And it's popularly called the Seven Sisters, which always makes me ask this question: if it's the Seven Sisters, why can I only see 6? And it turns out we're actually going to watch a little video here that maybe speaks to that a little bit. I decided to be lazy this month and let the Lowell Observatory do a little of my work for me, which, since we're going to be talking a little bit about the Lowell Observatory later, seemed like a perfectly appropriate division of labor. But here's the kind of name, I guess maybe you might call the sister stars, and there's actually 9 of them. The Pleiades in mythology were the nymph daughters of Pleione and Atlas, right? Atlas was a Greek figure who was on the losing side of some war, and his penalty for being on the losing side was he had to hold up the world, right? So Atlas got stuck literally holding the world as a result of being on the losing side of the war. Pleione, to be honest with you, I'm not really sure who she was, but the daughters were the Pleiades, and these are their names. Some of them are probably kind of familiar, actually. Maya, like I have a niece named Maya now, and so I don't know if she was named after this particular star, but I kind of like to think so. Actually, the Pleiades has about 1,000 stars or so in it. It was this kind of region. It was thought for a long time to be a kind of a region of active star formation, which it certainly would have been a part of a H2 region at one time. But the reason why it looks hazy like this is not because that's leftover stuff from the formation of the Pleiades. It's because it just happens to be passing through a pretty hazy area right now. If you spectroscopically analyze the nature of the dust that's around this, you find out it really isn't the parent material for these stars. They are relatively young stars, or what are called B-type stars. If you remember the sequence, the stellar evolution sequence, right? Oh, be a fine girl, kiss me now, or be a fine guy, kiss me now. The B stars are the second hottest of all the stars, right? Relatively young. They look very blue. They actually look, to me, blue enough to actually look blue to the naked eye. They look very blue in binoculars. So that kind of tells you that they're young, very, very hot stars. So here's the mythology. Again, I kind of alluded to this just a little bit there, that these were the daughters of, at least in the Greek mythology, these were the daughters of Atlas and Pleione. In fact, the story of the Pleiades may be one of the oldest myths in the whole human mythology. If you look at the number of, and this little video I'm going to want to show will kind of get into this, if you look at the number of civilizations or cultures or whatever you want to call them that have a myth that involves a group of young maidens who are being pursued by a hunter who end up in the sky as a way of being rescued, it's a very common myth, and even in some of the Native American mythology, that's the same story. So either everyone came up with the story sort of separately, or there was a lot more intercommunication in the prehistoric ancient world than we perhaps suspect, or again, maybe people know that maybe this is common knowledge. But anyway.
There's a Native American myth too, just throwing this out there. And instead of women, it was children.
Yeah.
And they were dancing around, they weren't supposed to, and they kept going up and up, and this one little kid wanted to come back, but he couldn't, and he's the one that makes up the dimmest star.
Oh, okay. Well, that kind of figures, right? Well, like I said, I got a little lazy this month, and so I'm going to show this little video here. This comes from the Lowell Observatory, which again, we're going to talk about Percival Lowell here in a few minutes, so I figured that kind of fits as well. That kind of talks about this. So this is a little short video here, only a couple minutes long. And I thought it was pretty well done. hopefully we'll hear it. Maybe we won't. Oh, there it goes.
Perhaps the most beautiful and famous star cluster in the sky is the Pleiades. The Pleiades lead the constellation Taurus, the bull in the sky, and they can also be found just south of Perseus. They are one of the loveliest sights in the night sky for binoculars. These stars are very young for stars, and the brightest of them are very massive and burn much hotter than the sun, giving them their famous blue color. To the classical Greeks, these stars represent 7 sisters. They are daughters of Pleione, the sea goddess, and the Titan Atlas. Atlas was on the losing side of the war between the Titans and Olympians. He was punished by being condemned to hold up the sky forever. The Pleiades were distraught at the fate of their father, so Zeus took pity on them and put them in the sky so that they could keep their father company. Another story holds that the hunter Orion fell in love with the Pleiades. Not wanting to be with a mortal, the Pleiades fled, and Orion pursued them. To help them escape Orion, the gods put the sisters into the sky. But eventually, Orion became a constellation as well, and he continues to pursue the Pleiades in the sky. Although the Pleiades are 7 sisters, it's hard to see more than 6 of the cluster's stars with the naked eye. Some astronomers speculate that one of the Pleiades stars has dimmed since antiquity. Merope is often storied to be the lost Pleiad. Perhaps she somehow lost her way, but one story holds that alone among her sisters, Merope fell in love with and married a mortal man. She now hides shyly in embarrassment. Now, in addition to the star Merope, the lovely nebula that adorns the Pleiades carries Merope's name as well.
Okay. Short and sweet. All right, so that's a little bit of that that story. As far as the actual stars, get into a little bit of the astronomy and all this. These are the major stars. You can see they're all B-type stars, which are these very hot, very large, kind of short-lived stars compared to cooler stars like the sun. One of the things about the Pleiades is that it is often used in photometry as a calibration target, right? Because the stars are kind of constant in their output. So when I was kind of taking a class from the AAVSO a couple years ago on how to do photometry, one of the targets that we looked at, one of the kind of standards that we looked at was in one of the stars in the Pleiades. So they're kind of frequently used for that as well. As far as where they land on the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram, I never pass an opportunity to look at the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram because I think it's just about one of the coolest things that ever came down the pipe. But they're up here in the kind of upper end of the main sequence, right? These are the B-type stars up here, and you see they have by stellar standards, they're big, right? So ones like the Pleiades would fall right about in here, I guess. Actually, a little bit further down. So they're about 10 times the radius of the sun, maybe somewhere in that vicinity, and a lifetime that would be measured in the tens of millions of years, which is quite a lot shorter than a main sequence star like ours down around here somewhere, which is more of a much longer lived. So anyway, that's where the Pleiades are as kind of astronomical objects as well. One of the other things about the Pleiades that's kind of noteworthy, I mentioned it lies nearly along the celestial equator. It is very near, and at one point actually was the first point of Aries, which it took me, I have to admit, a very long time to understand what this meant. But the first point of Aries is where the system of right ascension starts, right? So if you can imagine the Earth lined up on the first, what would be on the vernal equinox, and you extended that out into space, right? The Pleiades is almost, that's the first point of Aries, and the Pleiades is almost on it now, so that, and it's moved through time, right, because of, you know, astronomical objects move. So if you think about the, you know, extending out to the point where the celestial equator and the ecliptic, the plane of the ecliptic is the plane in which the Earth and all the other things in the solar system, for the most part, are orbiting the sun. So if you think about that as a plane, right, and where it intersects the celestial equator, which is offset because it's an extension of the Earth's equator out into space, where those two things cross at the vernal equinox, that's the first point of Aries. So that's kind of where the system of right ascension kind of starts. You know, if you look at like Stellarium or something like that and display the right ascension grid on there and kind of follow it back to zero, you'll see it's pretty close to the Pleiades. So that's another kind of important thing about it. Has a little bit of I guess prominence in popular culture. The car company Subaru is named after the Pleiades. That's the Japanese name for Subaru. It actually means 6 stars. So apparently the Japanese are either more honest or, you know, not willing to, maybe not as good eyesight, I don't know. But it came about actually because there were 5 Japanese car companies that formed a conglomerate, and so it became the 6th company. So they picked this asterism, which is actually also got a lot of other significance in Japanese culture. So if you've ever driven a Subaru, the little symbol on your car is a representation of the Pleiades. I've been told by my mechanic to not buy a Subaru because something about their engines wears out quicker, but so I'll probably be passing. But anyway, so that's another interesting character.
I said my Subaru is 30 years old.
Is it doing well? Apparently, and again, this guy's worked miracles fixing my 18-year-old car. So, but something about the Boxer engine, you know, its pistons go sideways. That puts stress on it. And this guy's also a mechanical engineer, so he gets into this. Yeah. All right, so that's a little bit about the Pleiades. So, questions? Anything? Comments? Personal experiences with the Pleiades?
It's one of those things when I have kids out, you know, looking at something, and they'll want to know about the fuzzy patch. Because they don't know, you know, is that smoke up there? What is that thing up there? You know, so it's always kind of a little starting point. Yeah. You know, and then you tell them the stories, and that always hooks them too. Yeah. But it's when you get out where it's dark, you can't miss the thing, you know, and it's different. So. Well, I was always, you know, I guess I was just maybe, I don't know why exactly, but I was always under the impression that that nebulosity that's around it was just, you know, left over from the star formation process, because you see that in other nebula like the Orion Nebula, right? But apparently that's not the case here. It glows blue because of the heat of the stars, but it's spectroscopically different, you know, from the composition of those stars. So it's something different. Anyway, other comments? All right, so as I've mentioned a couple times, I'm always looking for ideas on things to talk about in meetings. So if you all want to contribute an idea, I would be either happy to take the idea and, you know, steal it from you, or even more preferably have you run with it. But I was thinking about, you know, it's been a while since I've actually done the presentation, and I was kind of thinking about something that might be a little bit interesting to people. So I hope this is. All right, I want to talk a little bit about who I think was one of the most interesting people in the history of astronomy. And it's not this guy, although he certainly was one of the more interesting people in the history of astronomy. But part of the reason why I picked this particular topic was that, you know, a couple of important things happened with the planet, dwarf planet, Pluto, in February. First of all, it was discovered on February the 18th, and the man who discovered it was born on February the 4th. So February is kind of a big month for Pluto. So that kind of entered into my thinking as well. You know, originally I thought I would talk about something to do with this, but we've already had this, basically. I think last year I talked about
you know, the discovery of Pluto, and I didn't want to repeat myself. But I've also been reading a book, you know. I had a little time for novel reading, and so I was reading this novel right here, Percival's Planet, and it's a little bit about the discovery of Pluto, but it also goes into the precursor for that and involves the Percival, the namesake of this, who is Percival Lowell. And Percival Lowell, as we're going to find out, and as you probably already know, founded the observatory where Pluto was discovered. And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about Percival Lowell. Again, one of the more interesting, I think, one of the more interesting personalities in the history of astronomy, and I hope you'll kind of agree. And in some ways, originator of some ideas that are resonant to this very day. So you may be at least a little bit familiar with Percival in ways you may not necessarily have known or thought about. So, anybody who's heard of him? Most of you, right? Know anything about him? A little bit, maybe.
He's big into Mars, wasn't he?
Big into Mars. Big into Mars. Yes, he was big into Mars. Percival was, to put it very mildly, born into a very prominent family and extremely wealthy. Was a member of the Lowell family, who are what are referred to as Boston Brahmins. You've probably heard the term before, the very wealthy, socially prominent people that live in Boston. Was born in Boston in 1855, died in Flagstaff, Arizona, where his observatory was, 1916. Actually, the day that death is a little bit significant there because, among other things, Lowell was very much a pacifist. And it's thought that the stress of watching the world go to war in 1914 might have actually affected his health to the point where he was, died a relatively early death. I believe he was only 61, which, seems very young to me now. But here's a nice picture of Percival. As I said, he's born into an incredibly wealthy and prominent family, right? The Lowells of Massachusetts, there's their coat of arms right there, were a family that immigrated from England, I believe in the early 1600s, about 1630 or 1640 or so. The emigre's name, the man who actually came from England, was Percival Lowell. It was spelled L-O-W-L-E then. And they were immigrated from England in order to establish textile business. So the basis of the Lowell family fortune was the textile industry, which was huge in New England in the 1600s and perhaps even a little earlier. So these were the people that were, when the Mayflower showed up, they were standing there saying, "What took you so long?" Basically. The Lowell family, as I said, was just an extremely prominent one. This little bit of poetry here kind of is frequently referred to with the Lowells. The Lowells talk only to the Cabots, and the Cabots talk only to God. There has been a member of the Lowell family on they don't call them the Regents, but the Board of Governors of Harvard. They were involved in the formation of Harvard University, so somebody has been on, one of their members of their family has been on the Board of Governors or whatever they call it since it started, basically. So again, just a super wealthy family. His parents were Augustus and Catherine Lawrence Lowell. This is kind of an interesting thing too here. The Lawrence family, of whom Catherine was a member, was also very wealthy, very prominent family. These are people that are not marrying the help. They're marrying in a kind of parallel social circles. And one of the members of the Lawrence family, a relative of Percival's mother, was I believe his name was Augustus, Gus Lawrence, and he was very closely involved in the foundation of KU. I don't know if you may have heard of these. Some of you, they're associated with KU, and the town of Lawrence is named after him. So there's a little bit of a connection with that family through that avenue as well. He had some very interesting siblings. his sister Amy was a Pulitzer Prize winning poet and a very early advocate for LGBT rights. She was gay, and lived rather openly with a partner, a female partner, which was not a very common thing back in the early 1900s. She also apparently smoked cigars and had kind of interesting personal habits, but apparently quite a gifted poet. One of his other sisters, Elizabeth, was one of the founders of the idea of neonatal health care. She was very closely involved in health care for mothers. His brother Abbott Lawrence was a very prominent legal scholar and was president of Harvard from 1909 to 1933. The idea, by the way, of majoring in something in college came from this guy. Prior to this, if you went, apparently there was just kind of, I don't know, this maybe I'm speculating here, you just kind of went and took a course of classes, right? Everybody studied the same thing. Abbott Lawrence decided that there should be more specialization, so we came up with the idea of majoring in a subject. So if you majored in something in college, you can thank Abbott Lawrence or not thank him, depending on how you felt about your education. But anyway, so again, just an incredibly accomplished and prominent family. Lowell was very well educated man. He went to the Noble and Greenock School, which actually has produced a number of very famous people. President Kennedy was a elementary school graduate of this institution, so quite well connected. And of course went to Harvard, studied mathematics at Harvard, and was actually an extremely gifted mathematician. One of the things people I think don't quite understand about Lowell was that, you know, there's a tendency sometimes amongst people to sort of see him as kind of a dilettante, maybe, which is probably not entirely untrue, but he was an extremely well qualified one, if you want to kind of lay that label on him. Was quite a gifted mathematician and extremely well educated in astronomy as well. While he was at Harvard, he actually presented, there's a picture of him when he was at Harvard, he actually presented the graduation address, and he spoke on what was called the nebular hypothesis, right? The nebular hypothesis was, and still is, was an idea about how planets formed. So his interest in astronomy was certainly not recent, or not late, didn't come to it late in life. He was interested in it quite early, and he actually contributed significant science to the nebular hypothesis pretty much throughout his career. He's one of the people that connected the idea of the evolution of planets. You know, at the time he was thinking about this, Darwin had published his work on the evolution of living things, and Lowell was one of the people that kind of connected the threads of those ideas, you know, in a way. So he was clearly a pretty gifted thinker about these things from very early on in his life. But being a Lowell, I guess, he entered the family business, right? The family business was textiles. The Lowell textile mills were in the town of Lowell, Massachusetts, which is still there, all right? It's no longer a textile center. It's, unfortunately, when the textile industries went under, Lowell, Massachusetts really took it on the chin, to be honest with you. It's still a fairly depressing place, to be honest with you, based on my personal experience. But at the time, it was the center of the Lowell, the center of the Lowell family business. Employed a lot of women. They were referred to as Lowell girls, and they actually became quite famous too, because a lot of the genesis of the American labor movement, these were kind of the unsung heroes of that. In a lot of ways, they kind of, you know, in a lot of cases, the employment went to children and women because it was thought they would need less. And the Lowell girls, there's actually a book about it, which I have not read, but was their effort to kind of push back against that. And to be fair to the Lowell family, they were receptive to that. They seemed to, you know, more than some of the other prominent families at the time were at least accepting of the idea of the little more fair treatment of the labor. So Lowell went into the family business. Of course, was born into great wealth, but managed to accumulate his own. So he made his own fortune basically while helping to manage the Lowell textile mills. He was also really interested in the Far East, or what was called the Far East in those days, and particularly Korea. And at one point he was an ambassador. So he was kind of in the diplomatic service. He was an ambassador to Korea. There's a picture of him. And this was at a time when interactions with Korea were really very uncommon. I mean, even in interactions with China and Japan were not particularly, the connections were not as they are now. And it was even more so in Korea. One of the things that Lowell did was one of the first books he wrote a number of books in his life about astronomy, but about other things. And he wrote this book called The Soul of the Far East, which was one of the very first real studies, I guess, of Far Eastern cultures. But as somebody said, he was really interested in Mars, and he, after a while, just I think decided that he wanted to pursue that. And again, this was a man whose personal wealth made it possible for him to pretty much pursue whatever the heck he felt like. And so sometime, probably around the 1890s, he got really interested in Mars. And in particular, he got interested in Mars because of some work that was being done in Italy and in France. And this was the work by these two gentlemen right here. This is Camille Flammarion, and this is, God, I'm blanking, Schiaparelli. And they were at the time observing Mars and speculating on its habitability. And Schiaparelli in particular had created drawings of the Martian surface, which he thought perhaps contained visual evidence for life. And at the time, understand that there were people who essentially assumed that there were life on Mars, that Mars was Earth-like and contained life. You know, there are passages in old books that say, you know, and the Martians would be doing, you know, doing this today. So this was not considered a crazy or a crackpot idea by any means. What was a little bit different about some of the work that was done here was that these were very well-trained observational and very competent observational astronomers. Lowell, unfortunately, got caught up in what may be one of the most significant mistranslations in scientific history. Schiaparelli, when he published his drawings, and again, these were drawings. Photography at that time was not well developed enough to really be used for astronomy. So everything was visual observation and drawing. And it put a lot of emphasis on people who were good, not just good observers, but good draftsmen. And people, including, you know, some people much later, like Carl Sagan, would say that Lowell was neither. He was not a particularly good observer or a particularly good draftsman. But people like Schiaparelli was. And Schiaparelli published this drawing, and he referred to the lines that he saw on it as canali, and unfortunately got misunderstood as canals. It actually means something a little more similar to channels, which could imply either natural or man-made, right? But canal, that pretty much implies that this was constructed, right? And so Lowell kind of got the idea that this was, that these were canals, that these were evidence of a civilization that was global and organized enough to create a planet-wide network of canals, and he kind of ran with that idea. So he founded the Lowell Observatory in 1894. At the time, an absolutely state-of-the-art facility, right? The telescope that he installed, this Alvin Clark refractor, was the best of its day. It wasn't the biggest of its day, but it was the highest quality telescope one could get. And one of the other kind of clever things that Lowell did was he put his observatory at a high altitude location. He put it in Flagstaff, Arizona, which was high altitude and very dry. And Lowell understood that that would improve the seeing. And this was very revolutionary because at the time, other observational astronomers were working in, the suburbs of what are becoming larger and larger cities, right? The Harvard College Observatory was in a suburb of Cambridge. And so light pollution was certainly becoming an issue. So this was a really innovative idea. Nowadays, every major astronomical facility that's not in space is on a mountaintop somewhere, right? Or in a high altitude location for exactly the same reasons. So if nothing else, Lowell's innovative thoughts on where to put telescopes has carried forward to the present day, right? I wish sometimes we had a nice mountain we could put the Tombaugh on the top of. But so anyway, he established the Lowell Observatory in 1894, entirely privately financed institution, essentially to look at Mars, to study Mars. One of the other kind of interesting things that he did was he staffed his observatory with professional astronomers, right? This is a shot of the early shot of the observatory. There's Lowell right there. This gentleman right here is one of the Slipher brothers, who were the prominent astronomers who worked at the Lowell Observatory. So he wanted to, from the beginning, he wanted his institution to be taken seriously. So he hired professionals. And again, this was at a time when the idea of a professional scientist was still, I won't say in its infancy, but was definitely hadn't really reached adolescence yet. Throughout a lot of the history of science, scientists were quite often very wealthy amateurs, right? Like Charles Darwin, for example, right? Very, very wealthy family, extremely well educated, but wasn't their job. So this was again a little bit of an innovation for an institution in the 1890s to be hiring people specifically to do the astronomical tasks. And he proceeded to study Mars from the late 1800s up through his death in 1916. So this is a very famous picture of him at the telescope. He did a lot of his observation himself. Again, that might have been both good and bad. I mean, I can certainly understand it if you spend all that much money and this is your passion. He, as I mentioned, may not have been the best visual observer, but he was certainly dedicated to the task and spent quite a lot of time studying Mars. Published a number of maps and books of his own, and was utterly convinced that there was life there. Right? He said that Mars is inhabited by beings of some sort. We consider it as certain, but uncertain what those beings might be. This was actually from one of his earlier writings, and he kind of evolved ideas over the years about what those beings might have actually been like. But this is a globe that was created from some of his drawings. One of the things he was kind of criticized about was that it looked like, in fact, I think Carl Sagan commented on this, of course, obviously years later, because Carl came around long after Percival had died, but that he tended to, kind of draw sort of a triangular geometry here. But this was these are some of the drawings that Lowell produced as part of his studies of Mars.
The idea of the canals really was long lasting. When I was a kid, people speculated that the canals were real, and that there were civilizations on Mars.
Right up to the even early 60s, I think there were still some people who were, I think by then spectroscopy had gotten well enough advanced to kind of rule out a lot of the structures, but some of the people that worked at Lowell Observatory maintained right up until the Mariner missions that there were water features on Mars. So he published a number of books on this subject. The first one was just called Mars, and then Mars and its canals, but the one that kind of became the most famous, I guess, would be this one right here, Mars as the Abode of Life, published in 1908. In it, he not only made the case that Mars was inhabited, but he made the case that it was inhabited by this global civilization. This is where I think a lot of the criticisms of him really began to kind of take root, right? A lot of people up to then were on board with the idea that there may have been life on Mars. In fact, a lot of people were just as convinced as Lowell was. What Lowell kind of did in his book, in his books, and particularly in this Mars as the Abode of Life, was he sort of speculated about the nature of civilization that might be present. And so what Lowell pictured was a global civilization on a desertifying planet, right? So a planet that was kind of losing its water, basically. And so it had created this rather intricate network of systems to bring water from the poles, which were clearly covered with ice caps. You could just see that. Not really ice, it's ice, but not water ice. And so he then went into this speculation that this was a very benevolent, globally organized society. And there was probably a little bit of politics behind this too. It's because, as I mentioned, Lowell was very much a pacifist and would be what's referred to now as a globalist, which in some circles is a little bit of a dirty word, but he was of the opinion that what he was looking at was the actions of a global civilization and a benevolent global situation. And he would also argue a wise and benevolent and dying global civilization. And I think that's where a lot of the criticisms of him got rooted. There was a sense that perhaps he had gone a little bit overboard in some of his speculations. Some of the people that were rather critical of him were people actually friends of his. You know, these were both Antoniadi and E.E. Barnard, who was actually the namesake of Barnard's star, were professionals, right? They were trained astronomers on friendly terms with Lowell, but critical of his conclusions about the Martian civilization. Not necessarily critical of his observations that there may have been these water features and vegetation features, but critical of the context that he read into it. Their criticisms were fairly pointed, but I would think of them as, you know, scientifically based criticisms. Schiaparelli himself was also a little bit more diplomatic, maybe, but critical as well. He basically said that Lowell has superior means, right? He had wonderful facilities at his disposal. He thinks he'll make, you know, he has enthusiasm, he'll make considerable contributions. On the other hand, he needs more experience and must rein in his imagination. So this was fairly diplomatic criticism. There were others who were not so much. I couldn't, unfortunately, find the quote, but there was a pretty prominent astronomer who was at I believe at the Harvard College Observatory, or maybe he was at Lick. He was at the California Observatory, who mentioned that his summer reading list included the book Lowell's Mars because he didn't have time to read anything serious. So this was, you know, that's a pretty much a cheap shot right there. And I wonder sometimes, this is just me speculating here, but I wonder sometimes if there wasn't a little bit of maybe what we might now call class consciousness in this a little bit, because, you know, here was Lowell, this incredibly wealthy amateur, to be honest with you, who was able to, you know, build this state-of-the-art observatory and play in his nice sandbox and speculate on all these things, and the professionals are kind of maybe a little bit put off by that. I don't know. That's a speculation on my part, but reading between the lines of some of the criticisms you might see of him, I kind of got the impression that there was a sense of this, I won't say crackpot, but over-enthusiastic amateur kind of out there querying the pitch for everybody else, basically. So, I think some cases the criticisms kind of might have been motivated a little bit by that. This was another prominent critic. This is Alfred Russel Wallace, who you may have heard of. He was along with Darwin, developed the idea of natural selection, right? By the way, that is not a misspelling. There's only one L in his name. But he basically said, by this time he'd been fairly advanced, said it's not only uninhabited by intelligent beings, but it's absolutely uninhabitable. And he was right? He wrote this book called Is Mars Habitable?, which was a critical examination of Percival Lowell's book on it. And of course he was correct. At that time, things like spectroscopy were starting to become available, and there was just no evidence for water, basically. That was Russell's or Wallace's bottom line, was there's no water, and if there's no water, there's no life. And of course he was correct, but he was also pretty blunt in his assessment. Regardless of how he was taken by the astronomical community, he became very well known in the popular press. Of course, there was also speculation about what it was he was actually seeing. And he also looked at other planets. He looked at Venus as well and thought he saw canals on Venus. And it's been speculated, this is kind of a diagram that he made of Venus. I don't know if any of you have ever looked at Venus, but it basically is like looking at a white blob to me. You know, if I squint and pretend really hard, I can maybe see little gradations of the gray, but that's about it. There's been speculation that what he was actually seeing was a structure in his own eyeball. Right? I don't know about you, but if you look in a telescope, you know how you kind of see the little, you know, and I get those little floater things pretty bad, right? Apparently what they are is a little detached piece of something that is behind your eye. But anyway, so there's been speculation.
It only gets worse.
It only gets worse. Well, that's good to know. So there's some speculation that what he may have really been seeing was actually just an optical illusion created by his own eyes. He was innovative enough to begin to use photography when it became available. It didn't really support his ideas because, you know, instead of sketching what he thought he saw, now he was looking at what photographs showed. But he was fairly he was an early leader in the use of photography as well. And as I mentioned, he was very well known in the popular press. You know, he would have been as well known in his time as prominent popularizers of science like, I don't know, Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example. He would have been equally well known. Of course, in those days, the popular press was mainly newspapers. They didn't have, you know, YouTube and Twitter and all that kind of thing. But he made it into the popular press quite a bit and was extremely well known in the popular media, and well known to the public for his ideas. I think this might have also contributed to some of the pushback that he got, right? Because, you know, it's one of those weird little quirks of the science community that popularizers are sometimes a little bit looked at as a little bit askance, right? You know, even people like Carl Sagan got criticism for their popularization, and it's thought that perhaps Lowell did as well. But here's a couple of newspapers that kind of, you know, have some coverage of him. Here's one. Professor Lowell, Percival Lowell, recognizes the greatest authority on the subject, declares that no doubt living beings inhabit our neighboring world. So this would have been I think this was a Spokane, Washington newspaper that ran this. Anyway, quite well known to the public. And he had a lot of supporters, and some of those supporters persisted very long after Lowell's death, and really after the evidence had accumulated to that there was no life on Mars, right? That simply was not inhabitable, as Alfred Russel Wallace said. One of his prominent supporters was Slipher, one of the professionals that he hired who spent his entire career at the Lowell Observatory. 1962, as late as 1962, he was saying that traces of canals and oases will, photography will support it. Of course, the thing that kind of put the kibosh on it all was the Mariner missions that actually went to Mars. Of course, I'd started this off talking about Pluto, so I got to circle back to that a little bit. In addition to his interest in Mars, Lowell was also interested in planets, right, other planets, and in particular what he called Planet X. And remember, Lowell was an excellent mathematician and was fully capable of doing the kind of calculations that were required in celestial mechanics to identify new planets. He was familiar with the work of mathematicians who did the mathematical analysis that led to the discovery of Neptune, for example, right? That was all the result of rather complicated mathematical stuff. And so, so he knew about Leverrier and atoms, and he thought there was another planet out there somewhere, and he was quite interested in finding it. I think he was interested for his own sake, and also because I think he felt like if he instigated the discovery of a planet, maybe people would take him a little bit more seriously. But anyway, he instituted a search for planet. There was actually 3 searches for Planet X. The ultimate one, which took place after his death, of course, was the one where Clyde Tombaugh found Pluto, which in the fullness of time, as we know, was probably not what Lowell thought it was. But it was a search that took place at the Lowell Observatory. So there's the astrograph that was used for this, and of course there's Clyde Tombaugh looking through the blink microscope. This very I'm sure terribly tedious process that now we can do in about 30 seconds on our computers. Yay us. Of course, the Martian, what really laid the Martian idea to rest was Mariner, and particularly Mariner 4. It was the first probe that was actually made it to Mars. A lot of probes went to Mars and didn't survive. Mars, in fact, it became speculated that there had been such terrible luck with sending probes to Mars and them dying that people were starting to speculate that the Martians are sabotaging them. They don't want to be photographed, right? Eventually, Mariner 4 made it, photographed the surface of Mars. The first images that came back from Mariner 4 were referred to as the enhanced bed sheets because they didn't really show much. It was later learned that what they were seeing was a dust storm. And once the dust cleared, it was pretty clear that Mars was, in some ways, looked a lot like the surface of the moon. Heavily cratered, no water, clearly not inhabited. So this is what kind of put the Martians to rest. And of course, they've been at rest ever since. So what's Lowell's legacy then? Here's his mausoleum at Lowell. Anybody ever been to the Lowell Observatory? That's a pretty cool place, actually. Very interesting kind of mix of very old and very new, right? It's this kind of creaky 19th century building, but then there are these state-of-the-art facilities associated with it. But I think Lowell left a pretty significant legacy, really. I mean, some of the things that, some of his scientific work was pretty well regarded, even in his day. His contributions to the nebular hypothesis were certainly significant. His innovative use of locating observatories, right, in places where they would be more effective, right, where the environment was more suitable. That was certainly a scientific legacy that he left. Some of his innovations in photography and in spectral analysis also quite important. You know, the Lowell Observatory early on was one of the first ones to do a spectroscopic survey of the sky to actually, measure the spectra of objects as a survey. And that's what the very first evidence for radio velocities, right, for the expansion of the universe, actually came from the Lowell Observatory, from a sample of spectra that were collected from that Clark telescope. Of course, later that was expanded at the Mount Wilson Observatory, and that's what became the kind of the standard on which Hubble based the idea of the expanding universe. But the very first indication of that actually came from the Lowell Observatory. And he left a huge legacy in popular culture, and this is probably the thing that persists really to this day, right? And of course, the example of this was the War of the Worlds, you know. Well, it's funny because Lowell speculated that the Martians were these peaceful, benevolent people trying to preserve their planet, and H.G. Wells got a hold of the idea and said, no, they're this terrible, warlike race whose planet's dying, so they're coming to take our stuff, right? And they came and took our stuff, and unfortunately, the only thing that apparently stopped them was what, the measles? Or something like that. Bacteria of something. Yeah, they didn't have any natural immunity to versus bacteria, right? There's some subtext to that story as well, but anyway. And so a lot of the ideas that people carried, you know, into a lot of science fiction and even into popular culture really were rooted in these, you know, this idea of Mars as an inhabited planet with canals and stuff like that. Of course, there was several movies made about War of the Worlds. There was the famous radio broadcast that Orson Welles was Halloween night and sometime in the 30s, I guess, became quite infamous. All this has its roots in Percival Lowell, and a lot of other science fiction does as well. I don't know if I've read all three of these books, right? And I'm sure there's dozens, if not hundreds, of others. This was a book by Robert Heinlein, which, in one point, the protagonists of this book, these young boys, are going to ice skate back to their. Have you read this? They're going to ice skate back to their home, right? So they get out on the canal and they're skating, which is a very common thing to do if you lived on Mars. They get caught. They get trapped out after dark, and so they save their life by hiding inside this giant cabbage that keeps them warm, basically. Really interesting, very fanciful young adult book on Mars. But the Martian Chronicles is a classic, right? You know, there's a kind of a famous scene in the last chapter where one of the human colonists is looking at his reflection in one of the canals and seeing a Martian, right? Seeing himself. So it's kind of a famous passage in this book. And I don't know, the John Carter books were obviously really fanciful, and several movies have been made about these, none of them especially good, but the books are kind of fun reads. And again, this whole Barsoom, right, this civilization on Mars has its roots in this as well. So obviously cast a huge influence on popular culture as well. And one of the major legacies was the Lowell Observatory, which is still going strong. This was 125 years in 2019, so I don't know, add up to what we are now, 130 now. Still a major center for astronomical research. Most of the observing is not done from Flagstaff anymore. They have a remote station where they put most of their telescopes. But if you go on a tour there, you can still tour the facilities. You can see the astrograph that Clyde Tombaugh used. You can, I guess sometimes they even open up the 24-inch. Did you have a chance to look through the telescope? Yeah, apparently they'll open it up like one night a year, and you can go squint through this very famous.
But I did go out to the Mesa.
Did you go to Anderson Mesa too?
Where all the big stuff is.
I have never been out there actually. That would be but yeah, that's where they. But it's still a lot of pretty significant astronomical science done there. So this gyrochronology is, I don't know what that means. I'm gonna have to look that up. But certainly a lot of significant work. So the Lowell Observatory remains a pretty major center for astronomical research. Okay, and that is that. So, questions? Yeah, like I said, Lowell is, you know, I one of the things that got me really interested in astronomy when I was about 9 years old was I used to, maybe they still do that. Do they still do those?
Oh yeah.
You know, so you know, you get this little flyer and you can mark it down, you know, and my parents would give me like 50 cents to buy books, which in